The girl with auburn hair and clothes worn thin as paper had been sleeping in Yates Crawford's barn for 3 nights before he found her, curled up in the hay with her arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold the pieces of her soul together. Yates had risen before dawn that April morning in 1878, same as he always did on his ranch outside Laramie, Wyoming, to tend to the horses and check on the cattle. The spring air still carried a bite, and frost clung to the grass in silvery patches that would melt away by mid-morning. He had noticed small things over the past few days that did not sit right. A bucket moved from where he had left it, the barn door not quite latched the way he always secured it, a few apples missing from the barrel he kept for the horses. Yates was not a suspicious man by nature, but years of living alone on the frontier had taught him to pay attention to details that others might overlook. When he pushed open the barn door that morning, lantern held high, he saw her immediately. She was nestled in the corner of an empty stall, buried under a thin layer of hay that she had clearly pulled over herself for warmth. Her face was peaceful in sleep, younger than he had expected, maybe 21 or 22 at most. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her cheeks were hollow with hunger. Her dress, once a decent calico print, was patched and repatched, the hem thick with trail dust. Yates stood there for a long moment, considering his options. He could wake her roughly, demand to know what she was doing on his property. He could march her straight into town and let Sheriff Morrison deal with her. But something in the way she slept, so still and quiet, like she was afraid even her dreams might give her away, made him set down the lantern and approach slowly. He knelt beside her, close enough to see the freckles scattered across her nose, the way her lips were chapped from weather and want. "Miss," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Miss, you need to wake up now." Her eyes flew open, green as spring grass, and she scrambled backward so fast she hit her head on the stall wall. Fear radiated from her in waves, and she held up her hands as if to ward off a blow. "Easy now," Yates said, keeping his voice calm and level. "I am not going to hurt you. This is my barn, and I just want to know who you are and what you are doing here." The girl pressed herself against the wall, her breathing rapid and shallow. She looked like a wild thing ready to bolt, and Yates had the distinct impression that if he made one wrong move, she would run and he would never see her again. "My name is Yates Crawford," he continued, sitting back on his heels to make himself less threatening. "This is my ranch. You have been sleeping here, and I want to help you if I can." She studied him with those sharp green eyes, evaluating, calculating. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough from disuse. "I will leave. I am sorry. I did not mean any harm." "I did not say you had to leave," Yates replied. He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, which was getting too long and fell past his collar. At 28, he had lived alone on this ranch for 6 years, ever since his father passed and his mother went back east to live with her sister. He was not accustomed to company, but he was not heartless either. "I asked who you are." The girl hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Rose Vaughn. "Where are you from, Rose Vaughn?" "Nowhere anymore." Her voice was flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. Yates recognized that tone. He had heard it in the voices of men who had lost everything in the war, in women who had buried their families on the trail west, in children orphaned by fever or violence. It was the sound of someone who had been scraped hollow. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Rose looked away, her jaw tight. "That is not your concern. You are on my property, sleeping in my barn, so I reckon it is my concern." He stood up slowly, careful not to startle her. "Come inside. I will make breakfast." "No." The word came out sharp and defensive. "I told you I will leave. I will be gone within the hour." "And go where?" Yates asked, not unkindly. "It is cold at night still. You do not have a coat. Your shoes have holes in them. He had noticed that detail, the way she had tried to stuff cloth into the worn-out soles. Whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from, you do not have to tell me, but you also do not have to sleep in my barn. Sleep inside from now on. Rose stared at him like he had just spoken in a foreign language. Why would you do that? You do not know me. No, I do not, Yates agreed. But I know what it is like to be alone, and I know that sometimes people need help even when they are too proud to ask for it. So I am offering. You can take it or leave it, but either way, I am going to make breakfast, and you are welcome to share it. He turned and walked out of the barn without waiting for her answer, trusting that hunger and cold would be more persuasive than any words he could offer. Inside the house, a simple two-room cabin with a stone fireplace and sturdy pine furniture his father had built, Yates stoked the fire and put coffee on to boil. He sliced bacon and set it sizzling in the cast iron skillet, then cracked eggs into a bowl to scramble. The smell of cooking food filled the cabin, rich and savory. He was just sliding the eggs onto 2 tin plates when he heard the soft creak of the door. Rose stood on the threshold, backlit by the rising sun, looking like she might vanish at any moment. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and he could see the war playing out on her face, pride versus need. "Door is open," Yates said simply, setting the plates on the rough-hewn table. "Coffee is hot." Rose stepped inside, her movements careful and cautious. She closed the door behind her and stood with her back to it, taking in the cabin with quick, assessing glances. Yates watched her catalog everything, from the rifle mounted above the fireplace to the single pair of boots by the door, noting that he lived alone. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "Food is better warm." She sat slowly, perching on the edge of the chair like she was ready to flee at any second. When Yates set the plate in front of her, she stared at it with an expression that made his chest ache. He had seen men look at gold with less longing. "Go ahead," he encouraged, sitting down across from her with his own plate. Rose picked up the fork with a trembling hand and took a small bite of egg, then another. Then she was eating in earnest, with the focused intensity of someone who had gone hungry for far too long. Yates ate his own meal slowly, trying not to watch her too obviously, but he could not help noticing the way she savored every bite, the way her shoulders gradually relaxed as food filled her empty stomach. When her plate was clean, she wrapped her hands around the tin cup of coffee he had poured for her and finally met his eyes. "Thank you. You are welcome." Yates pushed back from the table and stood. "I have work to do today, fences to mend on the north pasture. You can stay here in the cabin if you want, or you can help if you are feeling up to it. Either way, when I come back for supper, I will expect you to still be here." "Why?" The question burst from her like she could not contain it. "Why are you being kind to me?" Yates considered the question, then answered honestly. "Because someone should be. Because you look like you have had enough unkindness to last a lifetime. And because I have space in my home and food in my larder, and it costs me nothing to share." Rose looked down at her coffee, her throat working. "I do not have money to pay you. Did I ask for money?" "No, but then we do not need to talk about it." Yates pulled on his work coat and settled his hat back on his head. "There is more coffee in the pot. Bread in the box if you get hungry again. Make yourself at home." He left before she could protest again, heading out to the barn to saddle his horse and gather the tools he would need for fence repair. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of spring day that made a man glad to be alive. As he rode out to the north pasture, he found himself wondering about Rose Vaughn and what had brought her to his barn, what had put that haunted look in her eyes. Rose spent the day in a state of disbelief. She washed the breakfast dishes in water she heated on the stove, her hands clumsy from the unfamiliar luxury of soap. She explored the cabin with cautious steps, noting the neatness of it, the way everything had a place and purpose. There were books on a shelf beside the fireplace, real books with leather bindings and gold lettering. She pulled one down and ran her fingers over the cover, but she did not open it. She had not read anything in months, not since her world fell apart. The cabin had 2 rooms. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with the big stone fireplace dominating one wall. The second room was small, just large enough for a bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. The bed was neatly made with a patchwork quilt, and Rose backed out of the room quickly, feeling like she was intruding on something private. As the morning wore into afternoon, she found herself growing restless. Kindness made her nervous. In her experience, men did not help women without expecting something in return, and she kept waiting for Yates Crawford to show his true colors, to demand payment in the form she had learned to fear. But the cabin remained quiet and peaceful, the fire burning low in the hearth, and gradually she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had meant what he said. When she heard the sound of a horse approaching, her muscles tensed automatically. But it was Yates, returning as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. He unsaddled his horse and turned it into the corral, then came into the cabin with his hat in his hands and dust on his boots. "Afternoon," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "How was your day?" "Quiet," Rose answered, standing awkwardly near the fireplace. "I washed the dishes. I hope that was all right. More than all right, thank you." He moved past her to the kitchen area and began pulling out ingredients for supper. "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." "Do you know how to make biscuits?" Rose nodded. Her mother had taught her before she died, back when Rose's life had been normal and safe and predictable. "I can make them." "Good. Flour is in that tin, lard in the crock. I will fry up some salt pork to go with them." They worked in companionable silence, Rose mixing the biscuit dough while Yates tended the salt pork in the skillet. It felt strange and domestic, this casual cooking together, but also oddly comfortable. When the biscuits were golden and the pork crispy, they sat down to eat. "You said you have been mending fences," Rose said, breaking the silence. "How big is your ranch?" 300 acres, Yates replied. "Not huge by some standards, but enough to run about 200 head of cattle and keep a dozen horses. I have a hired hand who comes to help during roundup and branding, but most of the time it is just me. That is a lot of work for one person. It keeps me busy." He took a biscuit and slathered it with butter. "What about you? What did you do before you ended up in my barn?" Rose's hand stilled on her fork. She had known the question would come eventually, but she still was not ready to answer it. "I would rather not talk about it." Yates nodded, not pressing. "Fair enough, but I do need to know one thing. Is anyone going to come looking for you? Am I going to have an angry husband or father showing up on my doorstep?" "No husband," Rose said quickly. "And my father has been dead for 2 years. I am sorry for your loss. Do not be. He was not a good man." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she bit her lip, wishing she could take them back. Yates looked at her with understanding in his blue eyes. "Is that who you are running from? Family?" I said I did not want to talk about it. "All right." He stood and began clearing the table. "But for what it is worth, you are safe here. Whatever you are running from, it is not going to find you on my land." Rose wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it made her chest hurt. But safety had proven to be an illusion before, and she did not trust herself to recognize it anymore. That night, Yates insisted she take the bedroom while he made up a bedroll by the fire. Rose protested, but he was immovable on the subject. "You are a guest in my home," he said firmly, "and I was raised proper. A lady gets the bed." "I am no lady," Rose replied, but she was too tired to argue further. The bed was soft, the quilts warm, and for the first time in months she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The days developed a rhythm. Yates would rise before dawn, start the coffee, and then head out to tend his animals and work his land. Rose would wake soon after, still surprised every morning to find herself in a real bed in a real house. She began to take over the cooking, finding comfort in the familiar motions of kneading bread and stirring stew. She cleaned the cabin, swept the floors, mended the holes in Yates's shirts that he had been ignoring. At first, she felt like she was paying a debt, working to justify her presence. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. Yates never demanded anything from her, never made her feel obligated. He treated her with a respectful courtesy that she had almost forgotten existed, keeping a polite distance, but always ready with a kind word or a joke to make her smile. One evening in early May, after they had finished supper and were sitting by the fire, Yates reading a book and Rose mending socks, he looked up and said, "You know, if you are going to stay here, we should probably let people in town know you exist. The neighbors will talk if they find out I have a woman living here." Rose's hands froze on the sock. "I did not realize my presence was causing you trouble." "It is not trouble," Yates said quickly, "but reputations matter out here, especially for women. I thought maybe we could say you are my cousin, come out from back east to help with the house. That would explain why you are staying here without causing any scandal. And what happens when people ask questions? Want to know about my family, my history? We keep the story simple. Your name is Rose. You are from Pennsylvania, your folks passed, and you came west to make a new start. It is close enough to true that you will not trip over the lies." Rose considered this. Part of her wanted to stay hidden to avoid drawing any attention. But another part of her, the part that was slowly coming back to life under Yates's gentle care, wanted to step into the sunlight again, wanted to be a person with a name and a place in the world. "All right," she agreed. "Your cousin." The next Sunday, they rode into Laramie together, Yates on his big bay gelding and Rose on a gentle mare he had saddled for her. The town was bustling with weekend activity. Ranchers and their families come in for supplies and socialization. Rose felt every eye on her as they rode down the main street, felt the weight of curiosity and speculation. Yates tied up the horses outside the general store and offered Rose his arm. "Head high," he murmured. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." Inside the store, they were greeted by Martha Gunderson, the shopkeeper's wife, a plump woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "Yates Crawford," she said, her gaze sliding immediately to Rose. "And who is this?" "Martha, this is my cousin Rose Vaughn," Yates said smoothly. "She has come from Pennsylvania to stay with me and help around the ranch. Rose, this is Mrs. Gunderson. She and her husband run the best store in 3 counties. Martha's expression softened slightly at the compliment. "Your cousin, you say? I did not know you had family back east." "On my mother's side," Yates replied. "Rose is Sarah's brother's daughter." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that Rose almost believed it herself. Martha peppered them with questions, and Yates fielded them all with genial patience, creating a believable history for Rose out of whole cloth. By the time they left the store with a bag of flour and a tin of coffee, the story had been established, and Rose knew it would be all over town by nightfall. "Do you feel bad about lying?" Rose asked as they rode back toward the ranch. "About protecting you?" Yates shook his head. "Not even a little bit. Besides, it is not entirely a lie. You are staying at the ranch and you do help with the house. The relationship might be fictional, but the rest is true enough." Rose smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face, like she was using muscles she had forgotten she had. "You are a good man, Yates Crawford." "I am just a man," he replied, but his ears went a little red, and Rose realized with surprise that she had made him blush. As spring deepened into summer, Rose began to venture out more. She started a kitchen garden behind the cabin, planting carrots and beans and squash. She learned to milk the cow Yates kept and to collect eggs from the chickens. She rode with him sometimes when he went to check on the cattle, learning to sit a horse properly and to read the signs of the land. Yates was a patient teacher, never mocking her ignorance, always willing to explain. He showed her how to tell if a cow was sick, how to spot the tracks of different animals, how to predict the weather by the color of the sky at sunset. In return, Rose brought comfort and order to his life. The cabin had never been cleaner or more welcoming. There were wildflowers on the table, curtains on the windows, and the smell of fresh bread more often than not. They fell into an easy companionship that surprised them both. Yates had been alone for so long that he had forgotten the pleasure of coming home to someone, of sharing the small moments of the day over supper. Rose, who had learned to be invisible and silent, slowly remembered how to be herself, how to laugh and tease and express opinions. One evening in late June, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink when Yates said, "I have been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," Rose replied, a teasing lilt in her voice. He smiled but continued seriously. "You have been here almost 3 months now, and you have never told me what you are running from. I want you to know that you do not have to tell me if you do not want to. But I also want you to know that you can. Tell me, I mean, if you need to." Rose pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. She had known this moment would come, when the weight of her secrets would become heavier than the fear of speaking them aloud. And the truth was, she trusted Yates. He had proven himself over and over in 100 small ways to be exactly what he appeared to be, a good man with a kind heart. "I had an uncle," she began, her voice low. "My father's brother. After my parents died, he took me in. I thought he was being generous, but he just wanted control of the small inheritance my mother had left me. When I turned 21 and gained legal control of the money, he became angry. He said I owed him for taking care of me, that I should sign everything over to him." "And you refused," Yates said. "I refused. So he decided that I should marry his business partner, a man named Gerald Sutton. He was 50 years old," Rose continued, "and he had already buried 2 wives. Everyone knew he drank too much and had a violent temper, but my uncle did not care. He said it was decided that I would marry Mr. Sutton and Mr. Sutton would manage my money. When I refused, my uncle locked me in my room. He said I would stay there until I came to my senses." Yates's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. "I was locked in that room for 2 weeks, Rose said. "They barely fed me, thought they could starve me into compliance. But the window had a broken latch, and one night I pried it open and climbed down the trellis. I took what little money I had hidden, the clothes on my back, and I ran. I bought passage on a stage heading west, thinking I could disappear in the territories. But my money ran out in Cheyenne, and I walked the rest of the way to Laramie. I had been sleeping in alleys and barns, trying to figure out what to do next, when I found your barn. And your uncle. Is he looking for you? I do not know," Rose admitted. "Maybe he has given up. Maybe he told people I ran off with a man or died or just disappeared. But I am afraid that if he finds me, he will drag me back and force me to marry Mr. Sutton. Or worse, he will have me declared incompetent and take control of my inheritance anyway." Yates reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "He will not. I will not let that happen. You cannot promise that." "Yes, I can." He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. Rose, you are under my protection now. If your uncle shows up here, he will have to go through me to get to you. And I promise you that is not going to happen. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about what happens to me? Yates was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger I was helping and became someone I care about. Because you make my house feel like a home. Because when I come in from the fields and see you in the garden, or hear you humming while you cook, or listen to you laugh at something silly, I feel like the luckiest man in Wyoming. Rose's breath caught. Yates, I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know you have been through a lot, and the last thing you need is a man making demands on you. I just wanted you to know that you matter to me. You matter more than I know how to say. Rose looked at this man who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had offered her safety and kindness without asking for anything in return, and she felt something crack open in her chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, this feeling that was blooming inside her. You matter to me too, she whispered. I did not think I could trust anyone again, but I trust you. I did not think I could feel safe anywhere, but I feel safe here. With you. Yates squeezed her hand gently, then let it go, giving her space. They sat together in the gathering darkness, the air between them charged with new understanding. The summer passed in a golden haze of hard work and quiet joy. Rose's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table and extra to preserve for winter. Yates's cattle grew fat on the summer grass, and he sold a small herd in late July for a good price. They attended the 4th of July celebration in Laramie together, and Rose felt a fierce pride when Yates won the roping competition, his skill and strength on full display. People accepted the story of them being cousins without much question. Rose became a familiar figure in town, helping at church socials and trading recipes with the other ranch wives. She made friends tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Martha Gunderson took a particular liking to her and often invited her for tea, grilling her gently about life back east, but also offering genuine friendship. As summer turned toward fall, the air between Rose and Yates grew thick with unspoken feelings. They were careful not to touch too much, aware that any physical contact sent sparks through them both. But their eyes met across the room with increasing frequency, and sometimes Rose would catch Yates watching her with an expression that made her heart race. One evening in September, when the first hints of autumn were coloring the leaves and the air had a crisp bite to it, they were doing the supper dishes together. Rose was washing and Yates was drying, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water. It was such a simple moment, so domestic and ordinary, and yet Rose felt the tension building until she thought she might scream from it. Yates, she said, setting down the plate she had been scrubbing. Yes. This thing we have been doing, this careful dance around each other, I cannot do it any more. He set down his dish towel, his expression cautious. What do you mean? I mean that I am tired of pretending I do not feel what I feel. I am tired of acting like we are just cousins or friends or whatever story we tell people. She turned to face him fully, soapy water dripping from her hands. I care about you, Yates. More than I should, more than is probably wise, but I do, and I think you care about me too. You know I do, he said, his voice rough. Then why do we keep pretending? Because I do not want to rush you, because I know you have been hurt, and I do not want to be another man who takes advantage. You could never be that, Rose interrupted. Do you not see? You are the opposite of that. You are everything good and decent and kind, and I am not made of glass, Yates. I am not going to shatter if you touch me. Rose. He took a step closer, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, desire warring with honor. I am saying that I want this, she continued, emboldened by her own courage. I want you. I want whatever this is between us to be real, not just an act we put on for the neighbors. You are sure? His hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their roughness from years of hard work. Because once we cross this line, I am not going to want to go back. I am sure. Rose leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. I have never been more sure of anything. Yates kissed her then, soft and sweet, like she was something precious that might break. Rose made a small sound of frustration and pressed closer, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. His arms came around her, pulling her against him, and the kiss deepened into something that made her toes curl. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I have loved you for months, but I did not know how to tell you. I love you too, Rose replied, and saying the words aloud felt like opening a window in a stuffy room, letting in fresh air and sunlight. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Do not be scared. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. We have time. We have all the time in the world. They stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing, stealing kisses between words. When they finally went to bed, Rose in the bedroom and Yates on his bedroll by the fire, it felt like a formality, an acknowledgement of propriety that they would maintain until they could be married properly. The next morning, Yates rode into town and spoke to Reverend Thomas about posting the banns. When he returned to the ranch, his face was split by a huge grin. 3 weeks, he announced. 3 weeks and you will be Mrs. Yates Crawford, not my cousin but my wife. Rose laughed and launched herself into his arms, and he spun her around in a circle, both of them dizzy with happiness. Those 3 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Rose sewed herself a new dress from cloth that Yates bought in town, a beautiful blue calico that matched her eyes. Martha Gunderson organized a small celebration at the church hall, inviting all the local ranching families. Rose wrote a letter to Yates's mother in Pennsylvania, explaining the situation and hoping the woman would not be too upset about her son marrying a stranger. To their surprise and delight, a telegram arrived a week before the wedding. Give her my love, be happy, we'll visit in spring. Yates's mother, it seemed, trusted her son's judgment and was glad he had found someone. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, late September sunshine pouring over the land like honey. Rose dressed in her new gown, her hair pulled back in a simple style with wildflowers woven through it. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This Rose had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. This Rose was loved and safe and about to marry the man of her dreams. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through hard work and faith. When Yates slipped a simple gold band on Rose's finger, his hands were shaking slightly, and Rose realized he was just as moved as she was. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Thomas declared. You may kiss your bride. Yates pulled Rose close and kissed her thoroughly, to the whoops and cheers of their neighbors. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, Rose felt a completeness she had never known before. She was no longer forgotten, no longer alone. She was Rose Crawford, wife of Yates, and she had a home and a future. The celebration at the church hall lasted into the evening. There was food and dancing, and Rose found herself passed from partner to partner as the local men insisted on dancing with the bride. But her eyes always found Yates across the room, and when they finally danced together, moving to a slow waltz as the sun set, it felt like the most natural thing in the world to be in his arms. Happy, Yates murmured against her ear. Happier than I ever thought possible. Rose replied honestly. They rode home under a sky full of stars, the horse moving at an easy walk, Rose sitting in front of Yates with his arms around her. When they reached the ranch, Yates dismounted and then lifted Rose down, holding her against him for a long moment. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crawford," he said softly. "It has been home for a while now," Rose replied, "but hearing you call me that makes it official." That night, for the first time, they shared the big bed in the bedroom. Yates was gentle and patient, treating Rose with a tenderness that made her heart ache. In his arms, she discovered that physical love did not have to be something to fear, that with the right person it could be beautiful and joyful and profound. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Yates's heartbeat steady under her ear, Rose felt the last of her walls crumble. She was his, and he was hers, and nothing would ever change that. As fall deepened, and the first snows dusted the mountains, Rose and Yates settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked together during the day, bringing in the last of the garden harvest and preparing the ranch for winter. At night, they sat by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply enjoying the comfortable silence of two people who did not need words to communicate. In November, Rose realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had not been sure until the morning sickness started. She told Yates over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "A baby," he repeated, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. In late spring, I think," Rose said. "Are you happy?" Yates came around the table so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. He pulled Rose into his arms, holding her tight. "Happy, Rose, I am beyond happy. I am over the moon. I am the luckiest man alive." Rose laughed against his chest, relief flooding through her. She had not realized how nervous she was until his reaction washed her fears away. "We are going to need a bigger house," she pointed out. "This cabin is fine for two, but with a baby." "Then we will build a bigger house," Yates declared, "with a real nursery and a bigger kitchen and whatever else you want." True to his word, Yates began drawing up plans that very evening. Over the winter months, whenever the weather allowed, he worked on cutting and preparing timber. He hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy construction, and by the time spring arrived, a new house was taking shape next to the old cabin. It was a proper ranch house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen with a real cook stove, and a parlor with big windows that looked out over the land. Rose watched it go up with wonder, unable to believe that this beautiful house was for her and her growing family. In May of 1879, on a warm afternoon with meadowlarks singing outside the window, Rose gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was hard, but Martha Gunderson served as midwife with skill and confidence, and when Rose finally held her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. "He has your eyes," Yates said in wonder, looking at the tiny red-faced infant, "blue as cornflowers." "And your strong jaw," Rose replied with a tired smile. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at their son, Yates said, "What about Samuel? After my grandfather, he was a good man." "Samuel Crawford," Rose tested the name. "I like it." "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world." Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, and both Rose and Yates marveled at every tiny thing he did. The new house was finished just in time, and they moved in when Samuel was 2 weeks old, carrying their belongings from the cabin to the bright, spacious rooms that smelled of fresh pine and new beginnings. Life developed a new rhythm, shaped around the needs of a small child. Rose was busy from dawn to dusk, caring for Samuel and managing the household. Yates hired a permanent hand, a young man named Tom who was good with horses and eager to learn ranching. This freed up more of Yates's time to help with the baby and spend time with his family. In the fall of that year, a man came to the ranch. Rose was in the garden, harvesting the last of the squash before the frost, when she heard an unfamiliar horse approaching. She straightened, her hand going instinctively to the knife she kept at her belt, a habit from her months of being alone and afraid. The man who dismounted was well dressed, with the look of a city dweller uncomfortable on horseback. Rose's heart began to pound. There was something familiar about him, something that sent ice through her veins. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice steady despite her fear. "I am looking for a Miss Rose Vaughn," the man said. "I was told she might be in this area." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. Her uncle had found her. "I do not know anyone by that name," she said, proud that her voice did not shake. "I am Mrs. Rose Crawford, and this is my husband's ranch." The man pulled out a piece of paper and consulted it. "I have it on good authority that Rose Vaughn came to Laramie last year. Brown hair, green eyes, about 22 years old." Before Rose could respond, Yates appeared from the barn. He must have heard the stranger's voice because he moved with purpose, his rifle held loosely but ready in his hands. "Is there a problem here?" Yates asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge that Rose had never heard before. "No problem, sir," the man said quickly, eyeing the rifle. "I am a lawyer, John Mackenzie, from Philadelphia. I am looking for a Miss Rose Vaughn on behalf of her late uncle's estate." "Late uncle?" Rose repeated, the words not making sense. "Yes, madam. Gerald Sutton passed away 3 months ago, and shortly after, Rose Vaughn's uncle, Mr. Howard Vaughn, suffered an apoplectic fit and died as well. Before his death, Mr. Sutton made certain allegations about Mr. Vaughn's treatment of Miss Vaughn, which came to light during the settling of the estates. I have been hired by the court to locate Miss Vaughn and inform her that she is the sole heir to both estates, a considerable sum of money." Rose swayed on her feet, and Yates was there instantly, his arm around her waist, steadying her. "You are saying her uncle is dead?" "Yes, sir. And if you are Mrs. Rose Crawford née Vaughn, then you have inherited approximately $15,000 plus property in Philadelphia." "15,000, Rose whispered. It was an unimaginable sum. "There is one more thing," Mackenzie continued, pulling more papers from his saddlebag. "Mr. Sutton, before his death, wrote a letter confessing that he and Mr. Vaughn had planned to force Miss Vaughn into marriage, and then have her declared incompetent to control her own affairs. He expressed remorse and stated that Miss Vaughn had every right to flee and should not be judged harshly for it. This letter has cleared your name, Mrs. Crawford. No one is looking for you. No one thinks ill of you." Rose could not speak. The relief was so overwhelming it felt physical, like a great weight lifting from her shoulders. Yates tightened his arm around her. "Thank you for bringing this news," Yates said to the lawyer. "My wife will need time to consider her options regarding the inheritance." "Of course." Mackenzie handed over a packet of papers. "All the details are here, along with my contact information. When you are ready to proceed, simply send word." After the lawyer left, Rose and Yates stood in the yard, the packet of papers clutched in Rose's trembling hands. "He is dead," she said. "They are both dead, and I am free." "You were always free," Yates said gently, "but now you do not have to be afraid anymore." Rose turned in his arms and buried her face in his chest, not crying exactly, but releasing something she had been holding on to for so long she had forgotten it was there. Yates held her, one hand stroking her hair until she was ready to go inside. That evening, after Samuel was asleep in his cradle, they sat at the kitchen table and went through all the papers. The inheritance was real, the money substantial. Rose could hardly believe it. "What do you want to do?" Yates asked. It is your money, your decision, Rose considered. I want to keep most of it invested safely for Samuel and any other children we might have, but I would like to use some to improve the ranch, maybe buy more cattle, hire more hands so you do not have to work so hard. You do not have to do that. I know I do not have to, I want to. This ranch is our home, our future. I want to invest in it. Yates smiled and reached across the table to take her hand. Then that is what we will do. The next few years were prosperous ones. With the inheritance money, they expanded the ranch, building a bigger barn and buying quality breeding stock. Yates hired 3 permanent hands and built them a small bunkhouse. The ranch became known throughout Wyoming for its excellent cattle and well-trained horses. In 1881, Rose gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Clara, who were red-faced and loud and absolutely perfect. Yates was beside himself with joy, doting on his daughters and his son with equal enthusiasm. The house rang with laughter and the patter of small feet. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved to follow his father around and learn about ranching. The twins were more mischievous, always getting into something, but they had their father wrapped around their tiny fingers. In 1884, another son arrived, Jacob, completing their family. Rose sometimes stood on the porch of their beautiful house, watching Yates teach Samuel to rope, while the twins chased chickens in the yard and baby Jacob slept on her hip, and she could hardly believe this was her life. The forgotten girl who had slept in the barn was gone, replaced by a woman who was loved and valued and who had built something real and lasting. She thought sometimes about that first morning when Yates had found her and instead of turning her away, had invited her inside. That one act of kindness had changed everything. As the children grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates proved to be not just a skilled rancher but also a shrewd businessman, and their reputation spread. People came from all over Wyoming to buy their cattle and horses. Samuel, at 16, was already a capable rancher in his own right, ready to take over some of the responsibilities of running the operation. The twins, at 13, were accomplished riders who competed in local rodeos, much to their father's pride and their mother's worry. Jacob, at 10, was the family scholar, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a teacher. One evening in the summer of 1894, Rose and Yates sat on the porch swing they had installed years ago, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The children were all inside, Samuel helping the twins with their schoolwork while Jacob read aloud to them. "Do you ever think about that first morning?" Rose asked. "When you found me in the barn?" Yates smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. At 44, he had some silver in his hair, but he was still strong and capable, still the man Rose had fallen in love with. "I think about it all the time. I thank God for that morning, for the chance to find you. I was so scared," Rose remembered. "I thought you would send me away or worse. I could not imagine that anyone would just help me without wanting something in return. And now I know that good people exist, that kindness is real, that love can be found even in the darkest times." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved me, Yates." "No," he corrected gently. "You saved yourself. You had the courage to run, to keep going even when things were hard. I just gave you a safe place to land." "We saved each other then," Rose compromised, "because I do not think I was the only lonely one that morning." "True enough," Yates admitted. He pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their children's voices drifting out through the open windows, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the chirp of crickets as evening settled over the land. Rose thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrified girl fleeing in the night to this woman surrounded by love and family. She thought about the inheritance that had freed her from fear and given them the means to build something lasting. But most of all, she thought about the man beside her, whose gentle wake-up call in a barn one April morning had been the beginning of everything good in her life. "I love you," she said, the words as true and vital now as they had been 16 years ago. "I love you too," Yates replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." Inside, they heard Samuel laugh at something Jacob said, followed by the twins joining in. Their family, their life, their home, everything they had built together. As full darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Rose and Yates remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had created. The forgotten girl had become an unforgettable woman, and the lonely cowboy had become a husband and father surrounded by love. They went inside eventually, to join their children, to share the evening meal, to live the simple, beautiful life they had made. And as they sat around the table, the lamplight warm and golden, Rose caught Yates's eye and smiled, knowing that every day with him was a gift, every moment a treasure. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Samuel married at 21, bringing home a sweet girl named Anne from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the far end of the property and started their own family, giving Rose and Yates their first grandchild, a little girl named Margaret. The twins, Emma and Clara, surprised everyone by deciding they did not want to marry. Instead, they started a horse training business together, developing a reputation throughout the territory for their skill with difficult animals. Yates built them a separate stable, and they thrived, two independent women making their own way in the world. Jacob, true to his childhood dreams, became a teacher. He moved to Cheyenne to attend the normal school there, then returned to Laramie to teach at the growing town schoolhouse. He married a fellow teacher, a quiet woman named Sarah, and they had 3 children who spent every summer on the ranch, learning to ride and work cattle. In 1898, when Rose was 42 and Yates was 48, they sat once again on their porch, this time watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 7 of them now, ranging in age from 2 to 10, a rambunctious bunch who filled the ranch with energy and noise. "We did good," Yates said, his hand finding Rose's as naturally as breathing. "We did very good," Rose agreed. She looked at the house they had built, expanded twice now to accommodate visiting family. She looked at the barns and corrals, the well-tended fields, the cattle grazing on the hills. But mostly, she looked at the man beside her, the one who had seen her when she was invisible, who had offered her shelter when she had nowhere to go, who had loved her when she thought she was unlovable. "You remember what you said that first morning?" Rose asked. "After you found me in the barn," Yates smiled. "I said a lot of things that morning. You told me to sleep inside from now on, like it was simple, like it was already decided." "It was decided," Yates said. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be there. I could not explain it then, but I felt it. You belonged there in that barn in my life." "Fate," Rose murmured. "Maybe, or maybe just luck. Either way, I am grateful for it every single day." As the sun set once more over the Wyoming landscape, painting the world in shades of amber and gold, Rose reflected on the 16 years since that April morning when everything changed. She had been so lost then, so broken, running from a past that had nearly destroyed her. But she had found more than shelter in Yates Crawford's barn. She had found hope and healing and a love that had sustained her through everything. She had found herself. The children called them in for supper, their voices bright and cheerful. Rose and Yates stood, their movements a little slower than they once were but still strong and sure. They walked into the house hand in hand, greeted by the warmth and chaos of family. And as Rose looked around at the faces of the people she loved, in the home she had built with the man who had saved her, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Not in that barn where she had once hidden, cold and afraid, but here in this house full of love and laughter, with the man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. She was Rose Crawford, wife, mother, grandmother, and rancher. She was loved and valued and safe. She was home. And it all began with a cowboy who woke a forgotten girl gently and changed both their lives forever. Many more years passed, bringing with them the turn of the century and all the changes it entailed. The ranch adapted and grew, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the traditions that had made it successful. Rose and Yates became fixtures in the Laramie community, respected for their integrity and generosity. In 1905, Yates suffered a bad fall from his horse while rounding up cattle. He broke his leg badly, and though it healed, he walked with a slight limp afterward and finally had to admit he could not do the heavy ranch work anymore. Samuel took over the day-to-day operations completely, proving himself every bit the rancher his father had been. Yates struggled with the transition at first, accustomed as he was to being active and useful. But Rose reminded him that there were other ways to contribute, and he threw himself into the business side of ranching, managing the books and negotiating contracts. He also spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to read and sharing stories of the old days when Wyoming was still wild and untamed. Rose, now in her 50s, remained active and engaged. Her garden had expanded into a substantial operation, providing vegetables not just for the family but also for sale in town. She also took on the role of unofficial grandmother to half the children in the county, always ready with a cookie and a listening ear. One day in the spring of 1908, Rose was in her garden when a young woman approached the ranch on foot. She was thin and dirty, her clothes worn, her eyes wary and frightened. Rose straightened from the carrots she had been thinning, and recognition swept over her like a wave. This girl was her 30 years ago, running from something, alone and desperate, looking for safety. "Can I help you?" Rose asked gently, the same words Yates had spoken to her so long ago. The girl hesitated, then said in a rush, "I am sorry to bother you, madam. I was hoping maybe you might have some work I could do for food. I can clean or cook or help with animals. I am a hard worker, I promise." Rose's heart clenched. "What is your name, dear?" Lucy Martin." "Well, Lucy Martin, I think we can definitely find some work for you. But first, when did you last eat?" Lucy's eyes filled with tears at the kindness in Rose's voice. "Yesterday morning." "Come with me," Rose said firmly, leading the girl toward the house. "Let us get some food in you and then we will talk about work." Yates was in his office when Rose brought Lucy into the kitchen. He took one look at the girl, then at Rose's face, and understanding passed between them. They had been given a gift once, and now they had the opportunity to pass it forward. Over fried chicken and mashed potatoes, Lucy's story came out. She had been working as a maid for a family in Cheyenne, and the husband had started making unwanted advances. When she refused him, he had accused her of theft and had her dismissed without wages. With no money and no references, she had nowhere to go and had started walking, hoping to find work in a smaller town. "You can stay here," Rose said when the story was finished. "We have room in the house, and we can always use help with the cooking and cleaning. The work is hard but honest, and you will be safe and treated fairly." Lucy stared at her in disbelief. "You would do that? For a stranger?" "Someone once did it for me," Rose said simply. She glanced at Yates, who nodded his agreement. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Lucy." "Everyone deserves kindness." Lucy stayed. Like Rose before her, she bloomed under the care and respect she received. Within a year, she had caught the eye of Tom, the ranch hand who had worked for the Crawfords for decades. They married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, and Yates gave them a piece of land to start their own small homestead. Rose watched Lucy and Tom begin their life together, and she felt a deep satisfaction. The kindness that Yates had shown her had rippled out into the world, creating more kindness, more love, more hope. In 1912, Rose and Yates celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and now their great-grandchildren. Samuel and Anne had 5 children now, all grown or nearly so. The twins, Emma and Clara, both in their 40s and still unmarried, ran a successful horse ranch that supplied animals to the army. Jacob and Sarah had 4 children, 3 of whom had already given them grandchildren of their own. The family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, groaning under the weight of food. Children ran everywhere, their laughter filling the air. Rose stood on the porch, surveying the scene with wonder. "Quite a legacy," Yates said, coming up beside her and slipping an arm around her waist. At 62, he was still tall and strong, though his hair was entirely white now and his face deeply lined from years in the sun. "It is it not?" Rose leaned into him, as comfortable with his touch now as she had been nervous of it in those first days. "Sometimes I still cannot believe all of this came from that one morning in the barn." "Not just that morning," Yates corrected. "It came from your courage, from your strength, from the way you decided to trust me even when you had every reason not to. And from your kindness," Rose added. "From the fact that you saw a person in need and helped without asking for anything in return." They stood together, watching their family celebrate, and Rose felt a completeness that went bone deep. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose. She had been forgotten once, lost and alone, but she had been found. And in being found, she had discovered not just safety and comfort, but also passion and partnership and joy. As the sun set on that anniversary celebration, casting long shadows across the ranch that had been their home for so many years, Rose and Yates danced together under the stars. Their movements were slower now, less graceful than they once had been, but no less loving. Their children and grandchildren watched with soft smiles, recognizing the rare gift of a love that had lasted, that had weathered all storms and emerged stronger. "Thank you," Rose whispered into Yates's shoulder as they swayed to music played by Jacob on his fiddle. "For what? For finding me, for seeing me, for loving me." "Rose Crawford," Yates said, pulling back to look into her eyes, still as green as they had been that first morning. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for building this life with me." They kissed, gentle and sweet, a kiss full of history and memory and enduring affection. Around them, their family cheered, but Rose and Yates barely heard. They were lost in their own world, the world they had created together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. When the party wound down and the last of the guests had gone home or to bed, Rose and Yates sat once more on their porch swing. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. "You think about what your life would have been like if I had not found you that morning?" Yates asked. Rose considered. "Sometimes. But then I stop myself because it does not matter. This is the life I have, the life we built together. Everything that came before was just preparation for this. No regrets. Not a single one." Rose took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You saved me, Yates, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me myself." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and had made something beautiful from that finding. The ranch slept around them, the cattle settled for the night, the horses quiet in their stalls. Everything was peaceful, everything was right. Rose thought once more about that girl in the barn, so scared and alone, who could never have imagined that the man waking her gently would become her whole world. She thought about the journey from there to here, all the moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge that had shaped their life together. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from lived experience, that every moment had been worth it. Every struggle, every fear, every doubt had led her to this place, this man, this life. As they finally went inside to bed, Rose took one last look at the night sky, at the land spread out before them, at the house full of sleeping family. She sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving for Yates Crawford, for his kindness and his love, for the day he found a forgotten girl in his barn and decided she was worth saving. She had been saved, but more than that, she had been loved. And in the end, that had made all the difference.